The West, one of the most arid regions in the U.S.
Yet, they are the most populated. What is that thing humans need to survive again? Oh yeah,
Water, which is something the makers of America did not take into consideration when deciding the location of the densest cities.
they needed to pay attention to the watershed in the West. What is a watershed?
A watershed is an entire region drained by a waterway that then drains into a lake or reservoir. It is said to be a living place that draws the sun and rain together. The watershed includes the source of the area's water supply.
They were well aware of this concept because John Wesley Powell made it pretty clear that this formation of the states and cities was not going to turn out well in the future.
John Wesley Powell was at the head of the Geological Survey of the United States of America and a Civil War hero. He lost his arm in the war and was known to the Indians as Couperats, or one arm off. Powell had a lot of respect towards the Indians and their way of life. He was interested in their language and traditions. He was so intrigued that while others wanted military escorts, Powell never carried a gun.
On May 24, 1869, Powell had his first expedition on the Colorado River. He collected geographical and geological data about the region. When there was a misunderstanding with the Chivwit Indian tribe on one of Powell's expeditions, Powell personally went to their land, Unkarat, to make peace by using his words instead of starting a fight. This earned the Chivwit Indians' respect towards him.
The makers of America were used to the crowded towns of the East, so when they went to settle West, they didn't think the size of the town would matter. The West was very different from the East, and it all had to do with the water. Powell tried to start every discussion about settling the West with this fact. There would not be enough water to make the dry areas wet even if every river there was diverted from its banks. The vision that Jefferson had of small farms from shore to shore was impossible.
In some localities in the western portion of the United States, this unequal distribution of rainfall through the seasons affects agriculture favorably, and this is true immediately west of the northern portion of the line of 20 inches of rainfall, which extends along the plains from our northern to our southern boundary. John Wesley Powell.
Lake Powell was named after John Wesley Powell by the Bureau of Reclamation to say he supported the Bureau's large dam building project. Some environmentalists believe that Powell's name was used in vain because Powell would have never approved of such big reclamation projects. He saw these projects with building dams like the Glen Canyon Dam and Flaming Gorge Dam as cash register dams.
No one in the 19th century knew more about the Western irrigation than Powell. He was head of the United States Geological Survey. In 1889, Congress let his agency work on the irrigation survey. He planned and oversaw ways to map this and survey the West for future dam sites. Through his reports in Arid lands, report in 1878 and later in 1890, his articles in Century magazine, he tells of his concerns with irrigation in the West.
Powell had 5 main points in these writings. He believed that water scarcity would allow only for 3% of the West to be irrigated. He recommended that every stream and river in the West should be developed for irrigation. Powell said that the development of water resources in the West should involve a cooperative effort of the federal government and local capital. The government would locate the potential dam sites, and then the local cooperative associations would provide the money, labor, and rules for establishing and distributing water.
These ideas came from his experiments on his expeditions in Colorado, New Mexico, and California. He emphasized that the federal government should stay out of the constructions and operation of dams.
In the name of the men who labor, I demand that the laborers shall employ themselves, that the enterprise shall be controlled by the men who have the genius to organize and whose homes are in the lands developed, and that the money shall be furnished by the people. And I say to the government, hands off! Furnish the people with the institutions of justice and let them do the work for themselves. John Wesley Powell.
His goal was for the small farmer to survive and farm in the West. Finally, he strongly opposed land and the water speculation.
Conquered rivers are better servants than wild clouds. All of the four great western rivers, are to be utilized in the near future for the hosts of men who are repairing to these surveyed lands.
John Wesley Powell.
But the federal government did not listen to his recommendations on local control or his warning of building big cities in arid regions. In 1906, John W. Weeks brought an idea to Congress to authorize federal purchase of private lands for the purpose of forest reserves. The powerful Speaker of the House, Joe Cannon, said, "Not 1 cent for scenery," in the debate against Weeks' proposal. Finally, the Weeks Act of March 1, 1911, was passed to allow the government to purchase private watershed land. Powell was very much against empire building. Like Jefferson, like many environmentalists, Powell did not like the idea of America being a big industrial power. Big empires in the West meant big cities. He wanted to keep the watersheds and dams ran by locals so industrial giants wouldn't take over and increase population.
The building of great industrial operations does not daze my vision. I love the cradle more than the bank counter. The cottage home is more beautiful to me than the palace.
John Wesley Powell.
John Wesley Powell created a map of how he thought that the state should be formed according to the watersheds. He also created a map to show the land given to the government by the railroad land grants. But even with all of his reports, maps, and discoveries along his expeditions, the government still did not listen to his warnings about the arid West.
West.